The main question is, are stablecoins net good or net bad for frontier markets?
If we are perhaps talking about stablecoins today, and by and large the ones that dominate, over 90% of volumes in emerging markets, in this case USDC and USDT, I would very much so argue that they are net good.
I'm thinking about the Trojan horse. Crypto has tried to find its Trojan horse forever. Stablecoins now are the Trojan horse. In that analysis, there are two parts: Trojans and Greeks. Basically, Trojans were fucked and Greeks won. When you are thinking about the Trojan horse, it's a weaponization of something to penetrate a market, right? Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Frontera, where we analyze what's happening in crypto in frontier markets. I'm Ab, co-founder and CEO of Bando, and I'm with my great friends, Kush, founder of Odisea, and Simon, head of growth at Alliance. We are experimenting in this new format where we're bringing Simon for a couple of weeks, having a lot of debates instead of just going through news. I think that in the AI era, everyone can have the best news at the tip of their hands. So it's better to have some debate. So, guys, how are you? How's everything? Where are you, Simon, right now?
I'm in New York in the Alliance office until tomorrow because the cohort, the first 2 weeks of the cohorts, we do them here in person in New York. So we fly all the team, and I'm going back to Portugal tomorrow.
Cool, amazing. How about you, Kush? You're still in Ecuador?
Yes, in Quito at the moment. I always feel like those in-person engagements are super important. Like, I don't know, even when I see we try to record in person. I'll see you next week. We'll be at the Stablecoin conference. Hopefully you can make it as well, Simon. Would love to have you down there.
That's in Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, and dude, Kush, I'm an Oasis fan. You can see it right here, and I'm trying to push this narrative of stablecoin summer versus Britpop summer, and it haven't stick yet. But dude, you should do this with Odisea. That's your next merge.
I will get that. I love that. Actually, let me send it to the designer right now.
Amazing, guys. So today we're gonna kick off our debates on a topic that it's actually pretty hot. Pretty hot for us, but I think that not a lot of people are questioning it. Because why is it hot for us? Because the three of us come from frontier markets. I come from Mexico. You, Kush, come from Guatemala. Simon, you're from Venezuela, and the three of us are building in different parts of the crypto stack. I'm building media and products. You, Kush, are more in the acceleration, like enterprise level, and Simon, you're basically in acceleration and VC. So the three of us have a really holistic perspective on the industry. We've been in the industry for, I don't know, 10 years or more. And stablecoins have catched a lot of fire recently. The stablecoin conference in Mexico City is happening next week. The Genius Act happened. Basically, it seems that the US government wants to tokenize all of their money and basically all of their debt. It's a way of tokenizing their debt. Stablecoins are the best wrapper for US debt across the world. And we see that there's an infinite appetite for the US dollar in frontier markets. That could be Brazil, Venezuela, Mexico, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, India, maybe even China, depending on how regulations go. And we bring this question. I mean, the main question is, are stablecoins net good or net bad for frontier markets? So, first of all, I want to start that analysis. Obviously, maybe we don't need to have a dichotomy. It doesn't need to be a polarized thing. It could be a gradient. And I really love this quantum thinking approach instead of binary thinking. But when you listen to this statement, let's start with you, Kush. Are stablecoins net good or net bad for frontier markets? Where's your stance?
I think not all stablecoins are created equally. And I think that if we are perhaps talking about stablecoins today, and by and large, the ones that dominate, over 90% of volumes in emerging markets, in this case, USDC and USDT, I would very much so argue that they are net good. I think ultimately, but I think the really interesting question is like, where does the space evolve? And as we start thinking about CBDCs and what the role of local stablecoins. I think those questions become, like, as you said, require a little bit more quantum thinking, both in sort of the current state and in future time. So that's just at a very high level how I would posit thinking about the role of stablecoins right now in frontier markets.
And when we think about specifically US dollar, US denominated stablecoins, net good or net bad?
I would definitely argue like net good ultimately, right? I think people being able to access the US dollar, people, so long as, again, like we have to ensure, and I'm specifically speaking about like the current state, because I do think there's a very nefarious world that we could unfold and unlock with stablecoins. If we look at different CBDC projects that are being piloted, whether that's the ECNY, for example, in China, Drex as well. I think there's some questions there. And we previously discussed the role of Brazil essentially trying to pass legislation that would not enable people to self-custody assets, for example, right? And in theory, like government-controlled stablecoins could unlock that future. So, but again, I think specifically US denominated stablecoins are ultimately like net amazing. I'm curious, Simon, if you would perhaps your take on this, if you might disagree with the general premise there.
Yeah, I definitely would have to agree with this. I don't think there's a lot of debate for this answer. I think they're definitely net good. And the reason why I am in this camp is kind of looking at it from a pragmatic perspective. And I think we have to go back to the history of money. How did we get to the current state of the economy of central banking? And a little bit of the history of how the United States implemented the petrodollar and basically forced other countries to start trading petroleum through the dollar. And that's how they kind of little by little entered like the other institutions that they established globally after the Second World War to basically push the dollar as the world reserve. And then, in a way, that kind of started forcing imports and exports globally to be traded in dollars. Central banks in other countries started to hoard dollars as part of their balance sheet, together with gold and maybe other assets. And so, in a way, unfortunately, we're all in this game where it's like a pyramid where like the United States sits at the top, and every other country in the world up until now, since central banking was established in 1904, I think, has just been forced to deal with the dollar. And the problem is that most currencies, most fiat currencies, are weaker than the dollar, and so up until now, these petrodollars that are now considered to be euro dollars are kind of controlled in many ways by the governments and by the banks. So not everybody is able to access them. Not everybody's educated about it. And the demand is currently coming mostly from countries with higher numbers of inflation or depreciation. But slowly and surely, countries with a little bit more stable economies, even like Mexico, which has had little inflation or depreciation, people understand it's the value of the dollar in Brazil as well, and in other emerging economies and frontier markets. So I think the transition out of the dollar requires that we first adopt the dollar more heavily for individuals and companies globally, so that we can then transition to a stronger form of money, which in my case, I think it's Bitcoin, but that's
Okay.
I'm curious, do you think that world is like a hyper Bitcoinized world? Like, do you buy into that thesis, Simon, where everything will ultimately be denominated in Bitcoin terms?
Yeah, I mean, if nothing better comes around, so I'm of the kind of idea of that, like Bitcoin is the best that we have, the best form of money that we have, and if somebody creates a better form of money, I will potentially kind of subscribe to that, but I highly doubt it. So far, that hasn't been the case, and Bitcoin has gotten to the point where I think it's widely like well established So I think the only path to a stronger form of currency is that one. Initially, it's going to be for value preservation, but I do see that in the future, once it reaches a certain market cap, most people will start also trading and using it as a medium of exchange because it does have some of those characteristics as well. And I think will the Bitcoin core, which are the developers, will find ways to kind of make it more efficient for microtransactions.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, guys, I think I need to take the other side here, and not for the sake of debate, but because I truly believe this. I haven't thought of the point that you said, Simon, that in order to get to that future where we have stronger currency in maybe Bitcoin, we need to go like all in into the dollarization of the world. So I'm thinking about the Trojan horse. Crypto has tried to find its Trojan horse forever. We said that NFTs were the Trojan horse, meme coins were the Trojan horse, stable coins now are the Trojan horse. And I really like the analogy of the Trojan horse because you need to think of, in that analysis, there are two parts: Trojans and Greeks. Basically, Trojans were fucked and Greeks won. So when you are thinking about the Trojan horse, it's like a weapon. It's a weaponization of something to penetrate a market, right? So I want to share with you a couple of data points in the sense that what I believe is that when we ask if stablecoins are net good or net bad, obviously you need to analyze they're net good for the United States, obviously. They're amazing. They're the best way to export their debt. And for Latin or for frontier markets or external markets, I'm not sure if they are positive. Why? Because in the essay that we published in Frontera, the United States, we have all of this data. You can go and read it in our newsletter. It's in the show notes. The United States need to refinance 9.2 trillion of their debt in 2025 alone. Okay, so their debt is in 37 trillion. And I don't know if, and not a lot of people talk about this, but 80% of the debt is held by like the public in the United States. A lot of people say like, oh, I don't know, Tether and China have a lot of debt. Well, pension funds, endowments, 401ks have more US debt than those countries. So they need to refinance the debt and then pay to their citizens. 80% of their debt is they need to pay it to their citizens. And also an interesting trend is that China, Japan, and Canada now hold 6% of the debt. And a decade ago, they held 23% of the debt. So international markets and countries are fleeing US debt, and the long end of the curve of yield is getting higher, meaning that people are not trusting that they can pay their debt. That's it, right? So the thing is, now we come to the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse, how I see US denominated stablecoins, is that they are a Trojan horse for the United States to export their debt. And whenever we say exporting a debt, someone will buy it. And basically, they are delegating the economic part of the debt, that it's basically someone buying that to someone else. And stablecoins are a fantastic way to do that at a close to zero interest rate. Why? Because if you go to different frontier markets today, and this might be changing in the next couple of years, and I'll do this exercise in Mexico, going across, I don't know, Mexico City and ask, would you prefer to receive your money in US dollars or in Mexican pesos if you can spend it? And I think that most people will say US dollars because it's in our, I don't know, Mexican psyche that the US dollar is a strong currency. So basically, through stablecoins, we're buying the debt of the United States. And in the other hand, we are pushing infinite sell pressure for the Mexican peso. And that's a huge risk for national sovereignty, the central banks are worried already. We're seeing in Brazil that they are trying to ban withdrawals from stablecoins. So I don't know if I'm crazy, but for me, it's really obvious that this could be like catastrophic for several fiat currencies.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke about this before, right? I do feel like the long tail of fiat currencies will probably dissipate and disappear. I think it just depends like who you're framing this. Are you thinking about this through the lens of like an issuer of fiat currencies, in which case, let's say the case of the Mexican government, or in the interest of the sort of individuals, right? I think problem is individuals are tethered to like their essentially what their nation state will dictate with regards to monetary policy. I mean, Venezuela is a really interesting example. Argentina is another interesting example where clearly these governments haven't handled their monetary policies in fiscally responsible ways. So I think it's just a question of like, would you rather have a sovereign currency? Yes, like the I don't know, the Argentine peso. Yeah, in theory they're not dollarized and they have a lot more autonomy, but unfortunately the government sort of handles the currency a really poor capacity. Or do you trust the U.S. government more when it comes to handling your currency? In the case of Ecuador, that went from the sucre to the dollar, El Salvador, Colon to the dollar as well. Clearly, the decision there was, look, we ultimately see that we trust the U.S. government a lot more, which is interesting, right? And now I think we're sort of shifting that power even more so now to like the circles of the world, who are sort of to some extent becoming the replacement of the U.S. government, which I think is like also another interesting layer to explore. Is these stablecoin issuers are in theory, amassing a substantial amount of power. They're obviously now specifically with Genius, much more tethered to the government. But yeah, I think it's just about like framing as well between whose hat are you putting on essentially.
Yeah, that's what I say, that US denominated stablecoins are great for the United States and they're great for the dollar. But when we think of a global perspective, we need to question if like extreme dominance of the US dollar and the United States are the best, or how could that impact? Because at the end is like colonization goes through a lot of vectors. It first started because of iron. That was the technology that iron and powder, basically. That was the technology that made Europe great colonizing, right? In the 1800s was the steam machine. That's why so like the British Empire was so powerful. They could move faster and they could have higher technology. And I think that today, in a moment where basically military power is homogeneous, like eliminating nuclear, that's terrible, and that's why some countries have it. But the next level of technology is money, and how to get the most efficient money all abroad. So what I'm thinking is that when we think of a hyper dollarization of the world, how could that impact local people? Because yeah, Simon, what do you think?
Yeah, so my personal opinion here is that there is a silver lining, where if governments have, like in frontier markets or emerging economies, have good monetary policy and they manage their central banking assets well, assets versus liabilities. Then the Mexican peso or the Colombian peso or the Brazilian real, whatever, they could gain strength in comparison to the dollar, which is actually currently weakening its currency on purpose. And in that case, in my opinion, one of the only ways to have good monetary policy is to hold hard assets such as gold or Bitcoin, and then have a good ratio of assets to liabilities. And so, as long as these local economies in frontier markets and central banks manage their finances well, we could see a stronger local fiats. But if not, those types of monies will potentially disappear slowly with a lot of most likely with a lot of socio-economic disturbance. Let's say, like, it's not going to be an easy path towards from the fiat central banking to changing that to whatever is the next step. There will be political instability, social instability, but we've seen this before. Like, there has been multiple types of monies throughout history, and we've seen them disappear as well. But again, like, if you have good monetary policy, I think it could be saved. Um, And the problem here is that the United States controls the IMF and the World Bank, which currently has a lot of leverage for basically telling central banks, you should and you should not do this. We'll basically loan you money if you follow these
Yeah.
rules. And a lot of the times, these rules are like you cannot hold hard assets, such as Bitcoin, which is what they did to El Salvador.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, like we're gonna need strong men leading frontier markets to say, fuck you. We're doing us, and we're gonna manage our economy better than you. And in that case, it doesn't matter if we have hyper dollarization and people can access dollars in Latin America, because as long as they can access their local fiat as well, even if it's a tokenized fiat, which would be amazing, by the way. Maybe we can talk about that in a second, like how local fiat stablecoins on chain together with US dollar stablecoins will enable a shit ton of startups and potential opportunities for founders. But yeah, in that case, it doesn't matter. Like the strongest currency wins, and that's it. But highly unlikely, in my opinion, highly unlikely that we find strong men. That's why it's so strange. Like it happened only in El Salvador. Maybe it's happening now in Argentina. Who knows?
And I love Ab and I always bring up El Salvador on this podcast because we're like, for me, what Bukele has done is, I mean, on so many different dimensions, like AI, crypto, etc., energy, and so forth. Specifically on the Bitcoin point, and I think what we're discussing, what's interesting is El Salvador is a U.S. denominated country, and they specifically said, we're going to start stockpiling Bitcoin. Right now, I was just really quickly looking up. They hold about $77 million worth of gold and $740 million worth of Bitcoin. So an order of magnitude more Bitcoin than gold, which just like proves the point. And then the other interesting component is they hold about $4 billion in foreign exchange dollars, US dollars. And so I think the interesting analogy here that I'm also thinking about, and it's to your point of hyper Bitcoinization, Simon, too, is when we start seeing, because I think El Salvador is the canary in the coal mine, the sort of bellwether for the rest of essentially all countries recognizing the U.S. now, with Besson essentially saying that they're not going to sell any of their reserves. Like this is just inevitable, right? And so I think that what will specifically happening in emerging markets is they're the first ones, and we've seen. I forget the names of the countries in Africa who are moving towards adopting Bitcoin, following El Salvador's example. I think that'll just continuously sort of happen over the coming decades, essentially, where more and more countries will start to stockpile Bitcoin, given that they recognize the value. But the IMF, as you also pointed out, has been really restrictive with El Salvador too, and they're clearly trying to push back against this.
I don't want to be the devil's advocate, but I'm thinking of something. While you were talking, I was going to like a really simple KPI that I think that we can look at to see how bad it's an economy, like how in trouble, how deep underwater they are. And I think that it's obviously the debt to GDP ratio. I think that that's a great KPI that we can look at. And I was doing some quick research, and let's take a look at this. So today, the US dollar, well, the United States has a debt to GDP ratio of 120%. So they are 20% more in debt than they can produce stuff. And when we analyze, okay, if they are the stronger economy, they should be the best. Also, the other countries should be, I don't know, 200, 250%. I don't know, that should be their indicator, right? But let's see. Mexico, I'm in the IMF, in the International Monetary Fund website. Our debt to GDP ratio is 60%. So we have, let's say, 40% of profits. I know that it's not that direct, but let's keep it for the analogy. 60%. Then I think that this one is Colombia, 59%. So let's say 60 also. Now this is El Salvador. El Salvador is 87%. Then here is Korea, 54%. Then this Vietnam, 33%. I mean, Vietnamese people are in, looking at this data, they are in great position. But the thing is that facts don't match with narratives and intersubjectivity, right? We all think that the US dollar is the most, like the stronger currency, but when you see this data, they're not. So like on the other extreme of the analysis is I don't think that we can change the narrative that the US dollar is super strong. And when we see that and we see the stablecoin like super trend, that argument that if a Colombian sees that their currency is going better, they will or they have better monetary policy, they'll stick to the Colombian peso. I don't think that'll happen because it's not a matter of how strong is the economy, but how perceived how's the perception of strength of the fiat currency, and that basically has its effects. So I think that we're in this position that stablecoins, I love them. I'm super bullish. I build on top of them. Don't get me wrong, but they could like kill real economies in the next 10 years, and that could have a ton of social impact. So that's my conclusion, I think.
I have one question here for you guys. Like, so pragmatically speaking, right? Like, what should the Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico's of the world do in a world where we have this massive dependency on US dollars across sort of these financial systems? Should everybody be stockpiling Bitcoin? If there is indeed a risk of the IMF essentially cutting off the milk, if you will, if that's a move that they choose to take, like, is this the type of risk that every single country? Because I think that's kind of also what we're trying to optimize for here. Is like, ideally, yes, but how does that happen?
I guess I don't have a good answer, and I agree. I just wanted to mention that what the point Abraham made is a good point. Definitely, like the monetary policy and how well you manage your assets and liabilities and your debt to GDP doesn't necessarily affect it. I think first of all we also have to look at the size of the GDP, the size of the debt. But I think the reason why the United States has such a big debt is because, again, they're sitting at the top of the pyramid, and then they can actually continue to emit more debt than their GDP. And other countries will continue to have demand up, even though the demand has been decreasing over time. Other countries have this demand because of the US military power. Because, again, the United States stopped backing its currency with gold and hard assets in 1971. And now the only thing that backs it is the United States economy. But the reality is that what backs it is their military power and the influence that they have, because they're the big dog, and they can basically go and insert influence. So one of the things I would say is, like, yeah, that's true. Like that, like having good monetary policy doesn't mean that you will survive. But I think that in a world where like extrapolating in the future, I would still try to continue to, like, if I was managing a country, to continue to collect hard assets that back my currency, so that in a future where people have to reevaluate how strong my currency is when everybody else is falling because they didn't do the right thing, maybe I will gain again reputation, enough reputation through not through military power, but through kind of good monetary policy. People will want to trade in that fiat currency because it's backed by actual hard assets. So that's one thing I would do. And secondly, in a world where kinetic war is less important, meaning that we have drone wars, I would definitely invest heavily in how to increase GDP, how to increase production, how to increase good talent, and how to increase military power in the world that we live in, where a small nation could potentially have a stage in the a floor in the stage of war, despite that they don't have a lot of people, because they have good technological advancements and they can build drones better than others. I would think about those two things.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I see that path. And in the analysis that we did, Kush, and I'd love to hear your take. And these are the scenarios that we plotted in the essay that we wrote. The first one is build a wall, so they can be China, Brazil, where they try to ban stablecoins. I see a lot of countries coming to that conclusion in the next couple of years, because for me this is obvious. The thing that I said, that it's an infinite selling pressure and all of that. So obviously that's a defensive take, and they lose. Whenever you want something that the market wants, I don't know, there's always ways to get that. The second one is join the empire, kiss the ring, adopt the dollar, and go all the way. And even this is kind of, it's weird that, I don't know, in several analysis and podcasts, people say even like, yeah, it'll be great to have 80 states in the United States of America. Maybe, I don't know, Guam or whatever random country wants to join, like, come over. And if that happened, then I don't know what would take Paraguay to be a state in the United States. And that's kind of scary. That's an empire, and people need to accept it. So then join the empire, kiss the ring. And the third one is the one that you just said, Simon, like taking a chance. I mean, it's like, I'm already deep underwater. I'm a small country. I don't have a lot of military power. Let's buy Bitcoin. Let's invest in AI. Let's invest in technology, and let's follow what Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore in the 20th century and what Nayib Bukele is doing in El Salvador in the 21st century. That's the one that I think is the most exciting. That's also the one that, when you think short term, looks more totalitarian. So it doesn't go well with the narrative of, yeah, democracy and freedom and all of that. But I think that we need to understand like these levers, like democracy, freedom, and then being a sovereign country. So those are the three scenarios that I see. The third one being the one that I would opt in. What's your take, Kush?
There's a really great quote here that I think encapsulates just at a meta level a lot of these conversations, and it's by Edward O. Wilson, and it goes, "The real problem of humanity is the following: we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology." And I think that's fundamentally sort of the issue when we're talking about all these things, right? We're running these governance systems that were built hundreds of years ago. We're using monetary systems that are, 15 years old, that are a complete radical sort of reinvention of what money sort of means in the world, in the case of Bitcoin specifically. And we also are sort of having to confront this very tribalistic perspective that humans have, this PvP kind of nature that ultimately ends up positioning in sort of these prisoner's dilemma, losing like outcomes, right? Where we're seeing these sort of mega powers trying to confront one another. And that's where geopolitics across the region, let's just focus in on Latin America, sort of come into play. So I guess like at a very high level, and this is why I really like network states and their value proposition, because I actually think that this is a really complex problem. And I do feel that what is required is essentially a radical transformation of what governance means for humans, centered around cryptography and sovereignty, and particularly in an age of AI, right? Where, like, again, the economic transformation that we'll undergo is completely unforeseen and unprecedented. So I suppose that to encapsulate, like, I think some of my thoughts tied to this, fundamentally is like what really needs to happen is for us to re-envision what state-like engagement looks like for individuals, right? Because I think now we are no longer tethered to the state through Bitcoin. We have complete monetary authority and sovereignty over our own kind of energy that we produce in this world. So that's where I think the world is heading. And I think that it's prudent for us to start seeing, and Simon, you mentioned, for example, in a world where we shift away from kinetic force and soft power essentially becoming increasingly important, that's where ensuring that in frontier markets, I think the most important thing that we should be investing into, the whole premise of this entire podcast is to advance the discussion around how do frontier markets accelerate towards frontier technologies, essentially. Lee Kuan Yew being a great example of going from a freaking swamp to one of the countries with the highest GDP per capita in the world in the span of 40 years. And I think we need to see more of that.
Yeah. Well, this was our first debate. I think that I really like it because no one in crypto is talking about these things. Everyone is like, yeah, go stable coins, because basically all media is American media. And then again, don't get me wrong, I love stable coins. I use them every day. I just did like a couple of transactions on them. I think that it's amazing technology. We just need to be not worry, but we just need to understand how this impact globally. So moving along to a couple of news, the most important news. Now we are deciding to select 2 or 3 news that happen in frontier markets this week. I'm discussing them. The first one is, I want to chat about what's happening in a lot of companies looking at LatAm this frontier market. Next week is the stablecoin conference. DevConnect will happen in Buenos Aires. And Dune, one of the most important analytics platform in crypto, just published a report called the Money Layer LatAm Crypto 2025 report. I see, Kush, you have a great quote here. Also, the thing of this report is basically they took Dune data, created a couple of dashboards, and analyzed key companies like Lemon, Bitso, Ripio, Kappa, BlindPay, a lot of people that we've had in Frontera. And it's really exciting to see these companies or these reports being built in basically for Latin America. And here we see that Bitso is like the most important Latin American market in or Latin American native company in LatAm. And why do I say this? Because but I don't know why Binance is not in this analysis, or maybe it's because it's impossible to segregate volumes from Binance Global to Binance LatAm. But I think that Binance has around of 80% of the market in LatAm. So, Kush, you read this essay. Tell us your key insights about it.
Yeah, we helped put some of this report together. I think precisely the point here is it's impossible essentially to segregate. Well, not impossible. It's much more complicated to segregate Binance flows, which is unfortunate because I actually think that provides like a really rich insight. I think that's probably like the next step. I think always, with these reports, it's sort of a first step towards like a much bigger project. Yeah, I'm curious what your takeaways were. I feel actually this report is not so much like money as a whole concept, but more payments focused. If you read like the rest of the data, it's more, because I think to Simon's point is like money is also, you can, I would have loved to have seen like lending, how people are lending, how people are using other DeFi protocols, how they're engaging with NFTs and so forth. But I think this was very like, because it's hard to identify this stuff on chain as well, right?
Yeah,
Which is why the
and
Binance data is missing.
Simon, I would love to get your take here because you are talking to all frontier teams, not only meaning frontier markets, but I mean some of the best teams in the industry go through Alliance. How do you see? Because now there are big companies looking at LATAM and to other frontier markets. What's the trend that you see for international builders coming to these type of markets? Is that happening? Is that not happening? How's the inflow of Alliance regarding this specific topic of building for these markets?
There is a lot of interest, and just empirically, I can tell you, like in this cohort, we have about 33 companies, and like 4 of them are people that are not from Latin America, and that have kind of toyed around with the idea of building for Latin America. One of them wanted to build remittances from the United States to Mexico. Pretty simple, pretty kind of obvious repeated play. Another founder, while they're waiting for things that are delaying their actual product that they need to build in the United States, they built a solution for people who want to come study in the United States to be able to pay for the tuition of the college of their kids through stablecoins with much better fees. There are definitely a lot of people, looking at it, and as you can imagine, the use cases are around stablecoins are remittances, lending. I would love to see a little bit more lending, actually, even if it's locally. As I mentioned before, local fiat stablecoins like the Mexican stablecoin, like the Colombian stablecoin, the Brazilian stablecoin, will enable a very interesting user behavior, which is basically getting a loan in the local fiat with the collateral being dollars, or like having a stronger form of collateral, meaning that it's in a way people call this like a self-repaying loan, as long as it's like a long-term loan, let's say. And that's a really amazing thing that can be enabled on chain, and the use cases for individuals and for companies are insane in this case, because in general, banks in Latin America, people either don't want to get banked because of taxes, or people or banks just discriminate a lot, so they don't loan as much money. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for companies leveraging decentralized protocols for creating like liquidity providing for loaning to individuals and companies. So yeah, the report is actually quite interesting. it's a little bit of what we know. Again, like there's in Latin America and in general in emerging markets, we use stablecoins because of its utility, mostly because it's good for saving, because it's good for lending, all of these things, rather than like using stablecoins for speculation. And so, unfortunately, with the Genius Act, I think there's a caveat. I think a lot of the stablecoin issuers are not going to be able to provide interest with the stablecoin itself. So there's kind of like a loophole there, but stablecoins do give people a lot more interest. And in a world where I personally believe that nobody actually knows the real inflation numbers in any economy. Like prices just get more expensive, and it's really hard to quantify. It's very complex, and it changes a lot by different types of parts of the economy. Like the higher yield, you're protecting yourself against like that, engineered devaluation of your currency. And stablecoins are an amazing thing to do that. And I guess I'll just finish up by saying that in the report, they mentioned that exchanges are basically the money rails, right? Like they're the way that people on and off ramp a lot of the times through Tron. But now that we're having new technologies like CKTLS specifically, I think I'm very optimistic about the fact that in the future we will have APIs, decentralized options, permissionless options to do on and off ramps, and to create self-custodial products that have a very similar or even better user experience than going through a centralized institution, and we'll be able to serve people from all parts of the socioeconomic pyramid.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of interest in building for LatAm. Stablecoins are an obvious play there. Really, we have this thesis also that I talk about this every time. Dollar app, two people from Spain, one American, Etherfuse, two Americans. What else? Felix Pago, they're building in the USA. They're two Latin, one from Venezuela and one from Mexico, building in Miami. So I think that there's this big trend of global builders coming to our region. And the final news is that this week, actually yesterday, talking about Bitso, Bitso's leadership team they were in the White House. They meted Patrick Witt, the principal advisor for Trump in crypto. And here's the photo. This guy is Daniel Vogel, the CEO. Felipe Vallejo, he's in charge of regulatory. The Trump administration guy, and I don't know who. Oh, this is the CLO, the chief legal officer. So we were joking that this is a really MAGA picture, like the United States. We are in the United States. So what do you think about this? How do you feel when you see the CEO of the most important crypto exchange in Latin America, like in this picture, and going to chat with the Trump administration? Let's
I
start with
feel
you,
like,
Kush.
yeah, I was just going to say, I feel that, essentially what we see happen in Latin America, because we have these really poor governance systems, is we're very lazy when it comes to implementing regulatory frameworks. So we usually just copy paste either European law or American law. Now the Genius Act has passed, and everybody's rushing towards stablecoins. I know for a fact, speaking with a number of kind of legal experts here in the region, that there is a lot of legislation that's essentially being drafted and trying to be pushed that is very in alignment with the Genius Act. Obviously, Bitso, we've spoken many times about how they've been first movers on the regulatory front, and they are certainly not slowing down here. Another just like very interesting side note is that Bo Hines, who previously was working very closely with the digital assets team, just joined Tether as well. So, and obviously Tether has a really big role to play in emerging markets. So I think we'll generally just start to see like a lot of propagation of Genius Act, which is, I think, not good, right? For the adoption of crypto overall.
I mean, honestly, nothing too insightful here. I just think, Bitso was one of the first companies in Latin America. They've been building for so long. As Coach mentioned, they've been at the forefront of regulation and figuring out how to operate in Latin America. They got one of the first licenses from Estonia or Lithuania. I don't remember exactly which country, and that enabled them to do on and off ramps in
Gibraltar.
Gibraltar. And yeah, they're just they're playing the game. I think they're probably really good at doing this kind of political games. I would say they're a centralized exchange in a way. They custody funds. So yeah, good for them.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I think that this is building bridges, and I think that I'm happy that basically, if Bitso goes to the United States, is because they are comfortable operating there. I work there. I know how relevant things regulatory wise are for them. I know how hard it is to launch product when you have such tight regulation. So I think that this is going to be super helpful. And guys, that's it. Really great pod, really amazing. I enjoyed the conversation. So remember to follow Simon at Simon Builds, Kush at 0x Kush. Apply for Alliance, and say that you listen to Frontera, and maybe Simon can take a look at your application. And also apply to all the programs Kush is doing with Odyssea. Go and test Bando. And thank you for everything, guys. See you next week and take care.
Ciao.